The Last Oathkeeper. A tale of Sir Ardent Carroway. The wind howled over the desolation of the iron wastes, a barren expanse where once thriving villages now lay buried beneath ash and ruin. The remnants of a kingdom that had once stood as a beacon of unity and justice, now teetered on the edge of oblivion. War, betrayal, and the relentless march of the shattered age had left the land broken, its people scattered, and its rulers slain. In the heart of this ruin stood a lone figure, a knight clad in battered silver armor dulled by years of war. His tabard, once pristine and emblazoned with the emblem of the Silver Circle, hung tattered and bloodstained. His name was Sir Ardent Carroway, but those who still remembered him spoke of him with reverence and sorrow. He was the last Oathkeeper, the final sentinel of an order that had been crushed beneath the weight of its own ideals. Ardent knelt beside a shallow grave, his gauntleted hands gripping the hilt of his sword. He bowed his head, murmuring a prayer for the fallen, a farmer who had stood beside him when no one else would, felled by an arrow meant for the knight himself. The blade he held, verdure, glimmered faintly in the fading sunlight. It was the last relic of a bygone age, a symbol of the oath he had sworn long ago, to protect the weak, to uphold justice, and to stand unyielding against the encroaching darkness. But darkness was all that remained. Ardent rose slowly, his body weary but his resolve unbroken. He cast his gaze toward the horizon, where the banners of the usurper's army billowed in the distance. The usurper, a tyrant who had claimed the throne through deceit and bloodshed, now sought to finish what he had begun, the total annihilation of the old order. His forces marched to crush the last pockets of resistance, sweeping across the land like a plague. Ardent could not stop an army alone, but he would not die as a ghost of the past. If the world was to crumble, he would see it fall with honor. With that thought, he tightened his grip on verdure and turned toward the ruined village behind him. It was there that the remnants of the Silver Circle's allies had gathered. Farmers with rusted tools, old soldiers clutching weathered swords, and children too young to understand the battle they would soon face. He stood before them, his presence commanding despite the weariness etched into his features. The world has forgotten what it means to fight for something greater than oneself, he said, his voice steady and resolute. But I have not, and neither have you. The crowd murmured, their fear palpable, but within their eyes flickered a glimmer of hope. Ardent raised verdure high, its blade catching the light of the setting sun. This land is our home. Its people are our family. We may stand on the edge of ruin, but so long as we draw breath, we can fight. We can endure. And we can show the darkness that it cannot extinguish the flame of our resolve. By nightfall, the makeshift army had taken its position along the crumbling walls of the village. Ardent stood at the forefront, his armor repaired as best as the blacksmiths could manage, his sword gleaming with an otherworldly light. He knew they were outnumbered, their odds of survival slim. But it was not survival that drove him. It was the promise of defiance, the legacy of an oath that demanded no less. The usurper's forces arrived with the dawn, their banners rising against the blood-red sky. They came in waves, their armor gleaming and their war cries shattering the stillness. Ardent led the charge, his voice ringing out like a clarion call. For the circle, for the people! The battle was chaos, a cacophony of steel and screams. Ardent fought like a man possessed, his sword moving with precision and power. Beside him, farmers and soldiers alike stood their ground, emboldened by the knight's unwavering presence. They fought not for victory but for dignity, for the right to say that they did not go quietly into oblivion. Ardent's movements were fluid, his strikes devastating. He felled warrior after warrior, his blade an extension of his will. But even he could not turn the tide alone. For every enemy slain, another took their place. The defenders began to falter, their lines breaking under the relentless assault. As the sun climbed higher, the village walls crumbled, and the defenders were pushed back. Ardent found himself at the center of the square, his back to the statue of an ancient king. Around him, the remnants of his force regrouped, their faces pale with exhaustion. "This is where we hold," Ardent said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Not for ourselves, but for those who come after. If we fall, let it be with our heads high and our hearts unbroken." The usurpers' forces surged into the square, their numbers overwhelming. Ardent raised verdure, its blade flaring with light as if the sword itself recognized the gravity of the moment. He charged into the fray, his voice ringing out in defiance. The battle was fierce and desperate, and one by one the defenders fell. But as they did, they took their enemies with them, their resolve unshaken even in the face of death. Ardent fought until his body could no longer move, his armor battered and his blade coated in blood. And yet, he did not fall. When the dust settled, the usurpers' forces withdrew, their ranks decimated by the sheer ferocity of the defenders. The village was silent, its streets littered with the fallen. Among them lay Ardent, his body still and his hand gripping verdure. But his eyes remained open, fixed on the horizon where the sun began to rise. Though his body was broken, his spirit endured. And in the days that followed, tales of the Last Oathkeeper spread across the land. They spoke of a knight who stood unyielding against the darkness, whose sacrifice rekindled hope in a world on the brink of despair. The Shattered Age was a time of ruin, but it was also a time of legacy. And Ardent Carroway, the Last Oathkeeper, ensured that the flame of the Silver Circle would not be extinguished. For even in death, his oath remained unbroken.